When Fu Lingkung dumped me and chose my sister, I thought I would cry, feel hurt and make a fuss, but he did nothing in the end and left with a large sum of breakup fees. From the beginning to the end, I knew that I was just a stand-in for my sister. Shenluo. I was doing the work of a stand-in and making money from men. I couldn't lose money, and I couldn't lose my heart. When Fu Lingkung came to me again, I smiled and refused. Sorry, my schedule is too full and I won't accept any orders. One Shenluo said I was an arrogant mistress. Her little face was red with anger. She stood opposite me, with the same long hair hanging down to her shoulders and plain long skirt as me. The only difference was that she was pitiful and I was arrogant. Shenluo pointed at my nose and scolded me. Chu Xiao, I went abroad for only 1 year, and you seduced Fu Lingkung away. Do you have any shame? I hugged my arms and raised my eyebrows at her. What is a face? Can it be eaten? She was so angry that she trembled all over, with tears in her eyes. Do you really think you won? Believe it or not, Fu Lingkung still loves me. You are just a substitute and you don't know it. I hugged my arms tightly, but smiled disdainfully. I don't know whether he loves me or not. Anyway, Fu Lingkung is with me every night. Shenluo's tears rolled down, pointing at me and shaking. Chu Xiao, you are such a shameless woman. How can you have the same father as me? I lowered my head and sneered. I can't figure out how we can have the same father. But I still answered her politely. Maybe it's because your mother is as shameless as me, interfering in marriages and stealing husbands, that you are born as an illegitimate daughter. You. Shenluo's face flushed, like a cat whose tail was stepped on. She raised her hand and slapped me. I touched my face, raised my eyebrows at her, and slapped her in the face with my backhand. She has been living a life of luxury since she was a child, but I have suffered all kinds of crimes. Our strengths are incomparable. Shenluo's face suddenly became red and swollen, tears fell like broken beads, and she took 2 steps back in fear. I took out my mobile phone and planned to ask the security guard to drive her out. Unexpectedly, her eyes suddenly lit up, she covered her face and ran towards the door, shouting as she ran, Lingkung, I'm so scared. My heart sank, and I turned around to see a tall figure standing at the door at some point, full of coldness and a gloomy face. It was Fu Lingkung who came back. He embraced Shenluo in his arms, patting her back from time to comfort her. His movements were extremely gentle. Shenluo smiled at me provocatively in his arms. My heart sank. I knew from Fu Lingkung's movements that I had lost the battle before it even started. Yes, I was just a stand-in when Shenluo and Fu Lingkung broke up and went abroad, but I was lucky enough to look like her. And I took advantage of the opportunity and offered myself. How could a stand-in still want to replace the real owner? But I was still a little unwilling in my heart. I smiled and walked towards him, wanting to take his briefcase. Lingkung, you are back. Fu Lingkung looked at me quietly, with a bad face and very unfamiliar. We made love late last night, and I helped him tie his tie and sent him out in the morning. But at this moment, he was hugging Shenluo, and I looked like an intruder. My tiny hope kept sinking. Shenluo cried in his arms, Lingkung, I regret going abroad. If I hadn't gone abroad, I wouldn't have lost you. Fu Lingkung looked down at her, his eyes full of tenderness, and touched Shenluo's hair. Every time he touched, my hope was reduced. He waited until Shenluo stopped sobbing, then Fu Lingkung raised his eyes and looked at me calmly, but he asked Shenluo, did Chu Xiao bully you? I gritted my teeth and said nothing. Shenluo choked and said, Sister Xiao Xiao is just impatient, but I didn't mean anything else. I came to you rashly today, and it's right for Sister Xiao Xiao to be angry. It was very pitiful. I lowered my eyes and said nothing. Fu Lingkung's expression said it all. It was useless for me to argue. The substitute had no right to argue. I knew I lost. Just like my mother lost to her mother. Very thorough. Fu Lingkung narrowed his eyes at me, frowning. Chu Xiao, on the first day you came, I taught you to know yourself and be sensible. I bit my lip, laughed at myself, and spread my hands to Fu Lingkung. Mr. Fu, I am very sensible. You play this scene, I quit. Fu Lingkung paused and said nothing. I lowered my head, adjusted my expression, and forced a smile. Mr. Fu, call me later, let's talk about breaking up. After that, I strode out of the villa without waiting for his answer. No matter how confused my heart is, my brain is not confused. I know that if I am more sensible at this moment and give up more decisively, with Fu Lingkung's personality, the breakup fee will be more generous. I am so mercenary. If the person is lost, the money cannot be lost again. As I stepped out of the door, I heard Fu Lingkung calling me from behind, Chu Xiao. My heart beat faster and I looked back at him, not knowing what he was expecting. Shenluo also looked up at Fu Lingkung and hugged him tightly, weak and helpless like a kitten, choking with sobs. Fu Lingkung looked at me, then at Shenluo, and finally lowered his head to wipe Shenluo's tears, lowered his eyes and said to me, I'll talk to you later. I turned and walked out, willing to accept the loss. That night, Fu Lingkung handed me the house deed, gold card and equity documents, and told me that he was going to get engaged to Shenluo and hoped that we would have nothing to do with each other in the future. I looked down and saw that the stack of documents in front of me could keep me from worrying about food and drink for the rest of my life. I nodded and smiled, raising the corners of my lips, and my expression was 90% similar to Shenluo's. Okay, Mr. Fu, thank you for taking care of me over the years. Fu Lingkung raised his eyebrows and looked at me, with a little surprise in his eyes. It Seems that he did not expect my calmness. No crying, no redemption, accepting it so happily. I put away his gift and smiled more sincerely. Thank you for the gift, Mr. Fu. Please rest assured, Mr. Fu, I will completely disappear from your sight and will never entangle you. Fu Lingke's brows slowly frowned. Chu Xiao, are you happy to break up? I lowered my head and corrected him with a smile. No, Mr. Fu, I am very happy to get the gift. Fu Lingke's eyes were full of dark anger. After a few seconds, he got up and left. I don't understand what he is angry about. His white moonlight has finally returned to China, and it's time for me, the substitute, to step down. Isn't it what he wants to see that I am sensible? And when I followed him, I adjusted my expression, voice, and clothing to be 90% similar to Shen Luo at every moment. I can be called the best substitute, and I am worthy of this money. Why is it that when Shen Luo comes back, everything I do is wrong? I took my breakup fee, watched him start his sports car outside the window, slowly retracted my previous thoughts, and smiled lightly. Ha, man. 3 on the day Fu Lingke left, I went from a stand-in to a rich woman. I took off my plain skirt, removed the light makeup on my face, and threw away all the innocent clothes in the closet. Those were all bought by Fu Lingke, in Shen Luo's style, not mine. I put on a bright red short skirt, dyed my hair brown when I went out, permed it into retro big waves, and put a touch of red on my lips. This is me, Chu Xiao. I bought a bunch of clothes and shoes I liked and returned to the door of the villa given to me by Fu Lingke with the joy of shopping. I grew up in a rough way, destined to be heartless and cold-blooded. Maybe I will be tempted for a while, but I will not let myself indulge in love. Just because I don't have the capital. Now, I just want to live a good life, a better life than Shen Luo. I want my mother to live a good life, a better life than Shen Luo's mother. When I first approached Fu Lingke, I thought clearly that I didn't want Fu Lingke's person. I wanted his generous breakup fee. As for the occasional heartbeat in the middle, just treat it as a cold. I got off the sports car and was about to go home when a figure suddenly rushed in front of me. I looked and it was Shen Luo. She said coldly, how much breakup fee did you ask Fu Lingke for? I raised my eyebrows, more than you can imagine. After all, I provide good service and the sponsor is very satisfied. Shen Luo sneered contemptuously, what's the use of providing good service? You are just a beggar, watching Fu Lingke love me, and then hiding in the corner crying. I was amused by her. Shen Luo, do you really think I can't let go of Fu Lingke like you? I approached Shen Luo and said slowly, from beginning to end, I have never loved him, I only love his money. You get his body, and I take his money. We are a win-win situation. What do you think? I know I am lying with my eyes open, but how can I show weakness in front of her? Shen Luo rarely said nothing. She kept looking behind me. I don't think it's right. There is a chill behind me. When I turned around, Fu Lingke was standing behind me. His face was as gloomy as water. How could I forget that Shen Luo provoked me, and he must have wanted Fu Lingke to see it. It was not enough to suffer a loss once, why did he suffer it again? Shen Luo ran towards Fu Lingke, and her small steps looked very weak. Lingke, why did you chase me? I just wanted to make peace with Sister Xiao Xiao, why are you worried? Fu Lingke hugged her in his arms, his movements were gentle. But his eyes were still fixed on me. Chu Xiao, you are great. I bit my lip and smiled, thank you for the compliment, Mr. Fu, come in for a cup of tea. He snorted coldly, no, disgusting. He hugged Shen Luo and left without looking back. I looked at his back, lost in thought for a while, and turned back to go home silently. That night, I took my mother from the old and dilapidated community to live in the villa. After settling my mother, half of my long-cherished wish was fulfilled, and I went back to my room to sleep with peace of mind. The bed was very big, and there was no space around me, and there was no embrace to keep warm. I have been afraid of cold since I was young. Many nights, I could only fall asleep by curling up in Fu Lingke's arms. I feel cold now. I am not as forgetful as I thought. For I fell asleep very late. When I woke up the next day, I went to the study, brushed my fingertips across the desk, and was in a daze. Many nights, Fu Lingke handled official business here, and I made a cup of tea for him and sat beside him. I am a qualified lover. I do what Shen Luo can do, and I also do what she can't do. For example, when Fu Lingke makes various decisions, I ask questions curiously. For example, remember all his investment decisions. For example, I can recite the names of the startups that he is optimistic about recently in my dreams. In the past few years, I have completely copied his investment thinking and business experience. I am his best apprentice. My hand brushed over his teacup again, and I made myself a cup of tea, imitating Fu Lingke's way, sitting behind the desk. Fu Lingke was very generous, and the breakup fee he gave me was enough for me to invest. He took me to many social events and left me with many connections. I finished my tea in the study, then got up, washed, changed into a skirt and high heels, made a few phone calls, and went out to meet people. I had been installing a substitute version of Shen Luo in front of him for a year, waiting for this day. This was the day I started to climb up. In fact, from the day my mother and I left the Shen family, I knew that being a wife was not as good as being a boss. At least the boss would not be laid off, but the wife could be laid off at any time. When I first approached Fu Lingke, I didn't just want to be a lover. I wanted to be Fu Lingkun. In the next few days, I was busy day and night and couldn't go home, and sometimes I was forced to socialize. I never drink in front of Fu Lingkun, but now I wear the sexiest dress, drink the strongest wine, and deal with all kinds of bosses. When they knew that I was abandoned by Fu Lingkun, they were all stunned, then looked at my fair skin, and patted my arms, hands, and thighs sympathetically. I don't care, as long as I can get into this circle first, I am not afraid of paying any price. The so-called self-esteem can only be discussed after becoming strong. It's just that everyone is a decent person. After all, except for various hints and leaving phone numbers, there is no radical behavior. Except this time, I met an old man who kept pouring me wine and dragged me to other boxes to touch me. I was weak all over, and I strongly suspected that the wine was drugged. I bit my lower lip to make myself conscious and randomly dialed a number to ask for help. A few minutes later, the nightclub owner came with security, pulled the old man away, and helped me out of the box. Half an hour later, Fu Lingkun appeared in front of me, with a cold aura, staring at my snow-white clothes exposed outside. At the most dangerous time, the only thing I could remember was his number. Seeing him standing in front of me, I breathed a sigh of relief, forced a smile at him, and let myself fall asleep. When I woke up again, he was lying in the hotel. I heard Fu Lingkun's voice coming from the bathroom, "Lolo, go to sleep first, I'll go back after I finish my work." The voice was gentler than I had ever seen. I still felt a little sad. When we were in love, I was also confused and hoped that there was only me in his eyes. I also acted like a spoiled child and wanted to ask him for a promise, but the first second he frowned, I smiled and hooked his neck, and never mentioned it again. I sighed and waited for him to finish the call and walk in front of me. He raised his hand and threw me a long skirt, and the tag was not removed. I don't know where he got it overnight. The skirt covered me from head to toe, and was pure white. "Chu Xiao, look at what you look like." He looked down at my tight red skirt that had shrunk to my thighs. "You are willing to be lowly." The smile I just raised slowly froze. He raised his chin. "Do you love money so much? What I give you is not enough for you to spend, and you have to go out to accompany you for drinks." I lowered my eyes, got out of bed to put on my shoes, stood in front of him, and put on a fake smile. "Mr. Fu is right, I am lowly, otherwise how can I be willing to be a substitute for someone?" "What did you say?" Fu Lingkun's eyes flashed with a fierce look. I raised my head, and for the first time I didn't greet him with a smile. "Mr. Fu, no matter how lowly I am, you have slept with me for a year. No matter how lowly I am, I have not cheated on my ex-lover. No matter how lowly I am also a legitimate daughter, and I didn't steal someone else's father." Fu Lingkun's face became even more fierce. I gritted my teeth and sneered. "Mr. Fu has never been poor, so he probably doesn't know that poor people are always afraid of not having enough money. Why don't you eat meat? If Mr. Fu really cares about me, you might as well go back and ask your sweetheart why he was born, why he made me from a young lady to a poor ghost, why the man who took me away told me that the unloved is the third party." Fu Lingkun's face relaxed for a moment. Maybe he had never seen me cry before, and he was shocked for a moment. I wiped my tears and was shocked for a moment. I thought I just wanted to climb higher, and I thought that after so many years of suffering, I had already abandoned all normal emotions, and thought that sadness, happiness, love, jealousy, these feelings were far away from me. But I never thought that I had so much unwillingness and so much injustice in my heart. I pushed him away, staggered out, called a car to go home, and tears couldn't stop flowing on the way. I used to be a little princess who was spoiled. Later, she became a substitute for an illegitimate daughter and a plaything for people to molest. Why? I don't accept it. After that day, Fu Lingkun never contacted me again. But the investments we had discussed before were all very smooth, and several good companies took the initiative to approach me. When I went out for social events, no one touched me anymore, and they were very polite. The only possibility was that Fu Lingkun had said hello on my behalf. I accepted all these good intentions. I was afraid of being poor, so I was particularly good at taking advantage. As long as the resources could help me climb up, even if they came from my former sponsor, I would gladly accept them. Things suddenly started to go smoothly, and I had enough money, so I signed up for an MBA course and expanded my network while studying. I also registered a company and slowly recruited people.it. It's better to buy flowers yourself than to ask others for them. I am studious, smart, resilient, and good at interpersonal relationships. Gradually, I also had a place in the circle, and some cocktail parties in the circle began to invite me to attend. Just like this time, a certain big shot had his birthday. I was an MBA classmate of his son and was invited. When I arrived, I found that my father was also invited. It was normal to think about it. My father was a successful businessman after all, and a well-known figure in this city. Everyone knew that he had both fame and fortune, but no one knew that he started from scratch with the help of my grandfather, and no one knew that after he cheated my grandfather of all the money he left for my mother, he took his mistress and illegitimate daughter home and kicked us out of the house. He didn't even recognize me, just because my mother asked me to take my mother's surname after the divorce, and no longer be surnamed Shen. He thought that I was a traitor and broke with him by agreeing to change my surname to my mother. Since then, my mother and I have lived through all kinds of poor lives. I used to pay electricity bills of 20 yuan at a time. I also used to walk home in the chaotic suburban area late at night with a stick in my hand, just to save a few dozen ye in taxi fares. Now I stood not far from him, watching him and falling doting on Shanluo, and suddenly I wanted to laugh. Sometimes, things in this world really don't make sense. The love that people praise is never faithful to one person, but the one who is more capable takes the top position. It's not cost effective. I retracted my gaze and prepared to go to another place to socialize. Unfortunately, as soon as I raised my foot, Shenluo saw me. She called me crisply, sister. Xiao Xiao. I couldn't pretend not to hear it. She ran up and took my arm. Why don't you say hello to Dad when you see him? There is no overnight hatred in the family. Are you still angry? Then she pulled me to my dad without saying anything. My dad snorted heavily, his eyes full of disgust. He glared at me. You came here dressed like this. Are you trying to seduce Lincoln again? I smiled coquettishly and glanced at Fu Lincoln. Do you think so? Fu Lincoln looked at my tight little dress, his eyes deep and silent. My dad scolded me again. Where did you learn these vixen tricks? How did your mom teach you? I raised my eyebrows. I learned it from your current wife. After all, she used this to drive me out. I have to learn it well. Shanluo's face flushed. Chu Xiao, how can you scold your elders? And my mom and dad got together because of love. I was so amused that I lowered my head and said, get together. It's a wild affair, right? Chu Xiao. Ha, Fu Lincoln's warning and loud slap sounded at the same time. My dad slapped me hard. It hit my ears, and my ears were buzzing. Everyone around looked over. Everyone looked surprised, except for the tall man opposite me, who was holding a wine glass and was very interested. His eyes stimulated me. I don't like anyone to see my embarrassment. All my efforts are to climb to a higher place, forget the humiliation of being abandoned by my father, and pick up the lost dignity. But I have tried so hard, but I am still beaten and treated like a monkey. Shen Chongming, who do you think you are? Why do you hit me? I covered my ears and rubbed them, and pushed my father hard. Because I am your father. He was furious and raised his hand again. But before he could hit him, Fu Lincoln grabbed his wrist. Fu Lincoln looked at my father expressionlessly. My father slowly put his hand down. Shenluo looked at Fu Lincoln, then at me, and tugged at the corner of Fu Lincoln's clothes. Lincoln, let go of my dad. You are strong, and my dad is old and can't bear the pain. I covered my ears that were still buzzing, and was amused again. Fu Lincoln reached out and grabbed me, and took me to the bathroom. I was inexplicably dragged by him, and when I passed the tall man with a smile, I even heard him say hello to me. Hi, I didn't care to pay attention to him. I staggered because of Fu Lincoln's pulling. When we reached the bathroom door, Fu Lincoln let me go and touched my face. Does it hurt? I felt wronged, closed my eyes, and let the tears go back. Fu Lincoln stared at my raised eyeliner, his eyes deepened, and whispered, you were the first to scold Luoluo's mother. You did not do it right. Go back and apologize to Luoluo later. I will drive you back. I suddenly opened my eyes. I even suspected that I was hallucinating. Fu Lincoln, you are crazy. I was furious. I shook his hand away. Why do you want me to apologize? Who are you to me? You are just my former sponsor. Do you really take yourself seriously? Fu Lincoln narrowed his eyes. Chu Xiao, what did you say? I said you are just my former sponsor. We have already settled the money. Why do you want me to apologize? What do you know? You come to act as a peacemaker. I was particularly irritable today. Fu Lincoln asked me to apologize to Shenluo. I had imagined before that maybe Fu Lincoln had a little shadow of me in his heart. Now, I think I am a slut. If people hold unrealistic hopes and fail to see their own weight, they will always be cheap. Fu Lincoln held my wrist, and it hurt so much that I broke out in a cold sweat. His eyes were dangerous. I knew he was really angry. His face was calm, his eyes were deep, and he looked at me and asked, Chu Xiao, only the sponsor can make you obedient, right? I was angry and didn't say anything. He got close to me again, leaned over to look at me, and touched my nose with mine. Name a price. Me. I suspected I heard it wrong. Say it again? I asked in surprise. Fu Lincoln said slowly, name a price. I will keep you again. I was really laughed at by the joke. You want to cheat? Want to cheat on Shanluo? I hope he says yes, and I hope he says no. Fu Lincoln looked at my exposed collarbone, his Adam's apple rolled, and two strange flames ignited in his eyes, which had never appeared in the past lovemaking. Chu Xiao, I don't like your current dress and temper, he said hoarsely. He put his hand on my collarbone. I won't do anything to let Luoluo down. But I hope you can stay under my protection, be good, and don't do anything that will put yourself at a disadvantage. My tears came out, and I laughed. Mr. Fu, you want to find a platonic mistress, right? But I'm afraid of trouble and have no patience. I always devote myself to you and don't chat with you. Fu Lincoln's eyes darkened a little more, and he pinched my shoulders, wanting to say something. But as soon as he opened his mouth, he was interrupted by the laughter behind him. Lincoln, your girlfriend is looking for you. The voice was cold and sarcastic. Fu Lincoln, and I looked over at the same time. It was the tall man who had a mocking expression on his face just now. He blinked at me. I found that he and Fu Lincoln were similar, both with sharp bones and handsome features. He extended his hand to me. Hello, Fu Roming. 6. I know Fu Roming. Fu Linko's uncle, the old son of the Fu family, is very capable. It is said that Fu Linko's parents are very afraid of him, and the fight for the family property in the future will definitely be a bloody storm. And Fu Linko is also the one he is most often compared with. After all, the two are only 5 years apart and both are outstanding. Fu Linko looked at Fu Ruoming vigilantly and protected me behind him without making a sound. Fu Ruoming smiled again. Do you want this girl to be slapped by her father again? Fu Linko hesitated for a moment, turned back and whispered to me, go home quickly and wait for my call. After hesitating, he raised his voice again, stay away from strangers. As he said that, he hurried to the hall. I vaguely saw that Shen Luo had already rushed to him with tears in her eyes, threw herself into his arms, and cried to him about something. My heart seemed to have a weight on it, and it kept sinking. Fu Ruoming leaned against the wall, looking at me with a smile. I suppressed my anger and looked at him. What are you looking at? See when you cry. He looked down at his watch. How long can you hold it back? I immediately held back my tears. You might as well go to the neurology department to see how long the cerebral infarction will last. Fu Ruoming laughed softly. He stretched out his hand to me. Let's make friends. I knew I should be good at dancing. After all, Fu Ruoming is worth currying favor with. But I really didn't feel like it at the moment. I shook my head and turned away. When I turned the corner, I looked back inadvertently and saw Fu Ruoming still standing there, staring at me. With his eyes, with a hint of excitement. After the cocktail party, everything started to go wrong for me. The cooperation we had agreed on was gone, and the company's business was also in trouble. I knew something was wrong, and I inquired privately. And it was my father who did it. Those who gave face to Fu Linko, when they had to choose between my ex-lover and my father, the future father-in-law, of course chose my father. I gritted my teeth and tried to find a solution, but I was not as well connected as my father, and now I had no chance to accumulate my own strength. I was in a mess, running around, and being laughed at by many people. Some people, whether out of kindness or falsehood, advised me to find another sponsor. They said that I looked good and would be able to handle things, and I would soon find someone to take over. I didn't want to, but I still insisted on finding a solution. Until one day, someone asked me to attend a drinking party, saying that a noble person would introduce me. I had no choice but to attend. As soon as I entered the box, I saw a man sitting on the main seat, with sharp bones and handsome features, who looked a bit like Fu Linko. She just loves to laugh more than him, with a pair of smiling peach blossom eyes, looking at me. He nodded at me, see you again. I bit my lip hard, forced myself to laugh, and sat opposite him. Mr. Fu, call me Ruoming. He raised his glass to me, let's be friends. I took a deep breath and nodded, okay Ruoming. 7 After the drinking party, Fu Ruoming drank a lot. When he left, he asked me to support him. I heard someone laughing behind us. Chu Xiao has a backer again, and he is going to turn over. Someone else said, this time they are looking for Fu Linko's uncle, and the Fu family will have a good show to watch. The uncle and nephew are incompatible. Or they say that beauty is a disaster. I pretended not to hear it, and secretly told myself that only by standing high up can there be no noise. Fu Ruoming chuckled above my head. How long can you hold it this time? I took a deep breath. How long do you want me to hold it? I can hold it as long as you want me to. Fu Ruoming glanced at his watch. Half an hour. He opened the car door and I got in his car. I almost gave up on myself. Anyway, I was born a mistress, and I was not as lucky as Shen Luo, but I still wanted to live better than her. Greedy, there will be punishment. Fu Ruoming sat in the back with me, his hands on his cheeks, squinting at me, with a faint smile at the corner of his lips. I didn't look at him, and let him take me wherever he wanted. After 10 minutes, he suddenly said, hold it for another 20 minutes. I looked at him, and he looked out the window. After another 10 minutes, he said again, hold it for another 10 minutes. The night outside the window was heavy, and the dim street lights reflected a dense forest. Only then did I realize that we were on the highway and had reached the suburbs. I was horrified, and many scenes from horror movies flashed through my mind. Looking at the person next to me, who was smiling all the way and didn't talk much, I felt even more terrified. Where do you want to take me? I shrank back. He looked at his watch. There are still a few minutes. My scalp was numb, and I secretly reached for my phone, wanting to call the police. He smiled, and reached behind me to take the phone. Why don't you wait a few more minutes? If you make a false alarm, the police will investigate. My face was numb with fear. I didn't want to die. I hadn't raised my head yet, and I hadn't taken revenge. Time began to slow down, and every second was torture. If you plant good causes, he should get good results. I looked at Fu Linko. My eyes were sore. I had to take a deep breath to force myself to say, I'm going to find Fu Ruoming, you should go too. Fu Linko's eyes flashed with pain. I'm getting engaged. If you come back, I can change someone. He came up to pull me again, but I dodged. Mr. Fu doesn't like women like me who play between uncle and nephew. If you get engaged to me, aren't you afraid that Mr. Fu will cancel your inheritance rights again? Fu Linko's hands froze. I stood there and smiled at him. Forget it. It's a pity to give up such a huge fortune. I think Shen Luo and you are a good match. Fu Linko has always been decisive. This is the only time I saw him hesitate. He even told me to wait until he was completely established in the Fu family. I smiled bitterly and watched him go away dejectedly. You reap what you sow. Fu Lincoln got in the car and disappeared from my sight after a puff of dust. For a moment, I felt empty. But it was only a moment. I hurried to call Fu Ruoming. After dialing the number, a waiting tone sounded on the other end. I was extremely anxious. After a long time, the other end picked up the phone, but did not speak. I became even more anxious. Where are you? I'll find you. The other end was silent for a moment, and then said softly, look at the west lane. I was puzzled and looked west as he said. A slender figure leaned against the Chinese tune tree beside the lane and smiled at me with his eyes bent. I was startled and hurried to meet him, carefully looking at him. When did you come? Why didn't you say anything? I was just tugging and tugging with Fu Lincoln, and I didn't know how much he saw, and I felt uneasy. Fu Ruoming smiled even more. Just arrived. I suddenly felt like drinking today, so I came to see you. I breathed a sigh of relief, but then I asked again, are you okay? I heard that I'm an illegitimate child, right? Fu Ruoming put his arm around my shoulders and led me to his car. He was so frank that I had nothing to say and could only twist my fingers. He asked me to get in the car and drove all the way to the suburbs. I found that this road was a bit familiar, a bit like the road to the Fu family's old house. I asked him nervously, are you going to take me to fight with them? Fu Ruoming was stunned for a moment, and then burst into laughter. He pulled the car over, pulled me to him without saying anything, and gave me a loud kiss on the forehead. Are you crazy? I understood that he was mentally unstable now, so I didn't care about his split behavior of kissing me and scolding me. He asked me to get out of the car. I got off the car and looked. Isn't this the lake where he forced me to cry that day? I was confused. I don't want to cry today. Fu Ruoming didn't look at me. He looked at the lake quietly. When I was a child, I felt that I couldn't hold on any longer, so I ran here and cried loudly. No one laughed at me when I cried here, no one looked down on me, and no one complained. This was the first time I saw his eyes without a smile, only a bit of desolation that didn't match his age. He still looked at the lake. My mother fought with the old lady of the Fu family for several years. She didn't sit in the position of the main wife, so she went crazy. She was admitted to a mental hospital. I started to make a living alone in the Fu family when I was 8 years old. My heart skipped a beat, as if I was pricked by a needle. But I didn't know how to comfort him, so I could only silently hold his cold hand and pass my body temperature to him. He held my hand in return. The Fu family all have lovers and illegitimate children. Fu Lincoln also has 2 illegitimate sisters. This is the first time I know this. I heard the sadness in his voice and leaned towards him, trying to warm him up. This is not fair. Fu Ruoming hugged me. When I was a child, I couldn't understand it. I always felt that it was the old lady of the Fu family who killed my mother and I should hate her. But when I grew up, I didn't think so. He turned and looked at the old house of the Fu family not far away. I should hate someone else. I nodded, and I felt the same way. This is why I never took the initiative to provoke Shenluo. I know who I should hate. Fu Ruoming hugged me and sat on the lawn. So, I have always had a dream. I want to make the Fu family no longer able to create one crazy woman after another, a wicked woman. I felt something was wrong. He smiled, but this smile was too cold. What do you want to do? I was nervous and even wanted to buy him a copy of the criminal law. Fu Ruoming smiled and looked down at my eyes, but this road is a lonely one. I walked very lonely until I saw you at the party. When you held back your tears and tried to be strong, I suddenly remembered my childhood. I think I finally found someone who can walk with me. I looked into his eyes. Those peach blossom eyes were no longer smiling, and there was a blush at the end of the eyes, which looked fragile. But even more attractive. Fu Lincoln said that I cast a spell, but at this moment I just felt that it was Fu Ruoming who really cast a spell. Facing these eyes, everything he said was right. He leaned over to me and kissed my lips, gently but firmly, and the kiss made me breathless. After a long time, he sighed in my ear, Xiao Xiao, I have been walking alone for too long. 12 Fu Ruoming and I were officially together. People said that I picked up a Fu family abandoned child and my brain was broken, but I was very happy. It turns out that a compatible lover can heal all pain. It turns out that hugging each other for warmth can heal all wounds. A few months later, Fu Lincoln got engaged and officially became the heir of the Fu family. Fu Ruoming and I went to the engagement party together. The old man and the old lady of the Fu family disliked me and didn't even talk to me. My father observed my expression and didn't even scold me, as if he didn't know me. Fu Ruoming and I were isolated in a corner, like 2 sources of infection. Everyone who passed by us quickened their pace, afraid to say hello to us. People are fickle, and the world is indifferent. I was afraid that Fu Ruoming would be disappointed, so I pulled him away. But Fu Ruoming smiled and patted the back of my hand. I have to see you completely give up. I was so angry that I laughed. Now I am full of him. How can I remember the fantasy of the past? I only care about him. Fu Lincoln was in high spirits and drank with others. Shen Luo was petite and lovely, leaning against him with a happy face. When they toasted, they turned around and saw me and Fu Ruoming. I waved to them from a distance and mouthed, happiness. Fu Lingke's wineglass fell to the ground, making a crisp shattering sound. I saw him take a step towards me, and was pulled back by Shen Luo without a sound. I smiled and shook my head, as if I was watching an old friend lose his composure. An old friend who had no grudges and no love or hatred. An old friend who had red eyes at me for no reason. I looked up and poked Fu Ruoming. Can we go now? Fu Ruoming giggled, lowered his head and gave me a deep kiss. He was full of domineering possessiveness. Then he put his arm around my shoulders, waved to Fu Lingkeng, and took me away. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Fu Ruoming, who usually planned and calculated every step, was so childish today. But he told me seriously, before fighting, you must first calm the troops. I don't want you to still be thinking about others. I rolled my eyes, but I felt sweet in my heart. It feels good to be valued. 13 After the engagement party, Fu Lingkeng officially took over all the wealth and power of the Fu family. This battle for the family property ended with Fu Ruoming's defeat. People said that Fu Ruoming was confused by me. Originally, his chances of winning were greater than Fu Lingkeng. I just smiled when I heard the rumors. I didn't have time to be angry. I worked overtime day and night, so I didn't have time to care about such rumors. Fu Ruoming was the same. After losing the Fu family's property, he became even busier. It was on the night when he took me to the lake for the second time that I found out that he had another company outside. He didn't show off his strength, but he was strong. He used the resources of the Fu family to feed him. Now, he has the ability to swallow up the Fu family. Fu Ruoming has been in the Fu family for a long time. He knows all the weaknesses of the Fu family's industry. This company is the nemesis of the Fu family. And my company, with his help, is also growing rapidly. Fu Ruoming said that he could not give me the status of the Fu family's ruling wife, nor could he let me get the flowers, applause and envy of the world. The only thing he could give me was the ability to let me get power, money, flowers and applause. He said that for a little wolf, feeding her and giving her meat to eat is far less effective than teaching her to hunt and helping her occupy a grassland. I deeply agree. When everything you have is earned by your own ability, you will no longer worry about gains and losses and walk on thin ice. At least you won't practice in front of the mirror thousands of times how to be more like another woman. You won't be afraid that anyone won't want you, no matter if that person is your father or your lover. Fu Ruoming gave him the illegitimate son raised abroad by the old man of the Fu family. He grew up and returned to China. It is said that he was quite favored by the old man for the old man Fu's power was still there, and he forcibly gave him a share of the Fu family's property. The old lady had been guarding against Fu Ruoming for many years, driving Fu Ruoming's mother crazy, but she couldn't guard against the foreign mistress who was hiding her strength and biding her time, so she gave up in a rage. And Fu Lingke's illegitimate sister saw the ready-made example and also found reporters to publicize her life story. And she was bound to get a share of the pie. Fu Lingke was under great pressure. Perhaps this pressure was passed on to Shen Luo. It was the first time I saw Shen Luo's face was haggard and sweet. She walked towards me and stared at me. What kind of drug did you give Fu Lingke? I was puzzled. Are you crazy? She gritted her teeth, unable to hide her tiredness. For 2 years, Fu Lingke asked me to wear a red skirt, high heels, and big curly hair, and asked me to learn everything from you. Even at night, he would call your name. I blinked, and then blinked again. I realized that Shen Luo's makeup, hairstyle, and clothes were all like me, as if copied. I felt ridiculous, but I couldn't laugh. Things have changed, and now Shen Luo is my substitute. I should be proud, but I just feel bored. I looked up at Fu Ruoming. Let's go, I'm tired. Fu Ruoming took a last look at the portrait of Mrs. Fu, took my hand. Let's go. We turned and left. Shen Luo cursed me behind me. His voice was sharp and out of control. I paused, but didn't turn around. 5 After Mrs. Fu's funeral, the Fu family was still noisy. But soon, they didn't want to make a fuss anymore. Several pillar businesses of the Fu family were attacked, and their market share shrank significantly. The old man of the Fu family and his son illegally operated, evaded taxes, monopolized unfair competition, and a lot of black history was exposed, which led to an investigation. The only one in the Fu family who could escape unscathed was Fu Lingke. The stock market was turbulent, shareholders sold off, and banks pressed for payment. The capital chain of the Fu family snapped. Overnight, the building collapsed, and the Fu family fell into decline. It was impossible for mistresses, illegitimate children, and illegitimate children to appear again. This wealthy family no longer exists in this world. Fu Lingke lost everything in an instant, and went from being the center of attention to being avoided by everyone. I asked someone to give him a card and return the breakup fee he gave me to him without missing a cent. He is not the same as he was before, and I am not the same as I was before. Now, I don't need to rely on anyone's breakup fee to get by. Fu Lingke returned the card and asked someone to bring a thank you. I knew that a lean camel is bigger than a horse, and his life would not be a problem. I also knew that he had real ability and would be able to turn things around sooner or later, so I took the card back and never mentioned it again. On the contrary, Shen Luo, who had a strong relationship with Fu Lingke at the beginning, divorced. Immediately after the Fu family fell. But she acted so quickly, but she couldn't save the Shen family. As a company that survives by relying on the Four Families industry, my father's lifelong hard work, half a month after the Four Family fell, a lot of black history was found, and it was difficult to continue, and declared bankruptcy. The night was beautiful on the day my father's company went bankrupt. Roaming, and I stood in front of the window, looking at the moonlight and raising a glass. He pointed out the window exaggeratedly, his finger almost raised to the sky. The moon is very bright. Under the moonlight, the ring on his hand reflected a faint silver light. I was amused by him, and imitated his exaggeration, and stretched out my ring finger to the window. Yes, it makes my ring so bright. He stretched out his hand to mine, holding his fingers together, 2 wedding rings, quietly, leaning against each other. Neither of us spoke. After a long time, he smiled and said, "Mrs. Fool, thank you for making me no longer lonely." I moved closer to his arms and replied to him quietly, "Thank you too. Thank you for letting me have my own strength, and I will no longer be afraid of being abandoned by anyone, including you. The moonlight is beautiful, the embrace is warm, and my heart is at peace, so that's all." End.